Welcome to the 5th DAO Day workshop and community call of LawFi DAO. We would like to welcome and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we all join. I'm joining from Wurundjeri land today, and we want to respect the elders past, present and emerging. I also want to remind you that you're being recorded. So if you have any concerns with being seen or heard or your text recorded, please send an email to jp@lawfidao.com and we'll make sure to edit the material out before the recording is posted. I want to repeat a statement about our culture and our beliefs and values worthy of restatement often as we're starting out, and especially as new people are joining, and so that we show these values and beliefs in our everyday actions, so that we can actually say this is the culture that we live and we're proud to be a part of. And that's respect, reciprocity, kindness and integrity while we're doing things differently, and very appreciative that time is our most precious resource. So, and lastly, before I get into the agenda for today, it's worthy of mentioning that this DAO, LawFi DAO, is different to a lot of DAOs that you would have seen come to now. And that's purposely so because of the education limb of our purpose. The demonstration and the going slowly to say, this is why we can't get an 8, or these are the legal structures that may or may not fit with what we're doing. That is not the typical process that the very code is law native DAOs have gone through and that have seen global adoption with token holders all around the world. And this exercise is purposely different to that, to say, if a lawyer was doing a DAO from the get-go, what are the tensions and what are the moral questions that we're asking ourselves to apply the existing law as best we can, or to really stress test which part of it is more appropriate than the other. And that both tells us whether the existing law is supportive of these innovative frameworks that we're all exploring, or if it's just clearly not. And it's a case study to actually demonstrate what are the true policy gaps in need of policy reform, but also what pieces of the law are preventing innovation that perhaps have been ignored by the DAOs that we've already seen to date. So they are technically in breach of the law, but with a good reason, for good purpose, to make things better, fairer, cheaper, and faster. So that's what's really trying to bring these questions into light through the case study. The LawFi DAO is not seeking to be another bureaucratic organisation or another layer. It's still very much true to that goal of striving for decentralisation and empowerment and abundance, that we're all contributing to these public goods for everybody to access and use, and in the most efficient and automated and fair way. So we might end up that we get back to a bureaucracy, but we're stress testing the existing laws and what needs to be found. So I just have had feedback this week that, you know, why is LawFi DAO being so stringent in its attempt to apply existing laws, and it can seem at odds with the true DAOs, but that's exactly the experiment that we're going through. So, and taking lawyers and technologists on that journey of why we're apart sometimes. So welcome to the other people that are trickling in. Varun, George, Leah, great to see you. Andrew and Amina. We're going to get into the community discussion after we whip through the agenda, but please feel free to put up your hand if there's anything that's that you'd like to contribute to while we're talking about it in the agenda. So over the past week, it's still been very much focused on the establishment subcommittee scope, so to speak. We continue to receive more membership applications and more membership payments into our Treasury wallet and into our bank account. we have successfully done our first multisig transaction to acquire our ENS name, lawfidao.eth. Yay! And that was an experiment in itself. You know, you're 3 steps forward and 2 steps back at every stage in a startup, and especially a DAO, because even just making sure that each of the signers on the multisig had enough ETH in their respective wallets to be able to do that initial signature called into question how to fund their wallets. So perhaps not with one of the digital wallets that they maintained for personal use or even for business use, but so that you don't have that forensic investigative trail back to a person's, you know, personal digital assets and transaction history. That even that discussion was a rich discussion to say, we'll create a specific centralised exchange account to have a fresh ETH transfer into the wallet that you're going to use as your multi-sig signer wallet. So things that feel simple on the outset always end up taking more time. But that process will write up into a bit of an experience blog, and again, for that repository or the reference for people to go back and say, oh, well, these are all the steps involved in setting up a multi-sig, and some policies that they may want to consider. And I use the word policies as the native lawyer, but in more shorthand language, that might just be the checklists that people go through to make sure they're setting things up with the benefit of the experience of people coming before them, not missing anything. So the other really interesting thing is we're using Gnosis Safe as our Treasury wallet, and the dashboard is really helpful. Actually much more helpful than what I've found the experience with the Web 2 comparison products like in Xero and all of their connected apps that help you run a more efficient business. With Gnosis Safe, the experience is so much easier because you don't need to create an account for each one that you're accessing. You do simply connect the wallet and you're straight into, this is the functionality that you can access, including what we raised last week about potentially automating the membership form and the collection of membership fees. There's an application already called Bulla Banker that we're now exploring, Shane and I, to see to what extent can we build the membership form into that, and that automatically then generates your invoice and receipt. But it may just be for payments that are received in either the USDC or the ETH into our Treasury wallet. And so Shane, as well, being familiar with the Xero product, and I'm sure a number of other accountants like Electra on the call today, in the establishment committee, we will flesh out further what that looks like for, as easy as it might be to do things through Gnosis Safe, what does it then look like if we try and integrate it back or have some similar type of bank feed into Xero to get some financial statements going each month and reporting out to the DAO. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. There's a number of applications in Gnosis Safe, including another one called OX Splits. Now, this one we will interrogate further in the Pay to Rely subcommittee, because it does what it says it does. It splits a payment, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with Pay to Rely. As soon as somebody makes that ETH or USD payment for their Pay to Rely NFT, it splits to the core contributor, the peer reviewer pool, self-insurance pool, and the fourth, which is our black box at the moment. Maybe it's revenue distribution, maybe it's grant distribution, but that functionality has already been built out. So we'll get into reviewing the public goods that are available, the smart contract audits, and the level of use that has already gone through those protocols to see if we're comfortable to at least test with them, and then potentially rely on them ourselves as we build out our collection of protocols that make up LawFi DAO. So there's continues to be further information that is exchanged with a centralised token exchange, a bank, a token custodian. specifically, and potentially that could do our Treasury management. That will be also reported out probably in more detail in the establishment subcommittee, with all of the materials in the establishment project section of the JIRA. Now, if you've been given access to JIRA at the moment, it's still light on. I'd just like to remind everybody that Fridays are DAO days, and that is definitely true because I have a day job also from Monday to Thursday, but I'm squeezing in as much as I can to prepare things and move things forward and support the members that are becoming more active in LawFi DAO, so that we can report out and activate every Friday. But we're still very much side hustling. This is not a full-time job for any of us, or a full-time contribution. So please bear with us while we move very slowly. I'm excited to say that the Discord server is close to ready. Jules is one of our members. He's been working on that too. And the only holdup now is reviewing the rules. So that basic checklist or things that you would like to get across before you delve deeper and contribute into the Discord server. Now, part of that we will deal with in the establishment subcommittee as well. Before LawFi DAO, I had, as an experiment, done a Discord server for Bedazzle, which is my business. And there are a number of community benefit channels which will help the policy working group of our community building subcommittee. And last year, I think it was last year, we saw the merger of two DAOs, with what we saw became the Tribe DAO. Now, an M&A in DAO world is a new thing, and ultimately I think that it has failed, really, because Faye was tied up in a stable coin. We might see some derivatives out of it, but it was very, very big news that this merger happened last year. One of the things that the lawyers would really love to sink their teeth into is what are the assets of each DAO, and what are the tax consequences on such a merger for any entity that we may characterize, that is the DAO, as well as for all of the members. But a significant activity is the Discord server and all of the richness and community heart and perhaps IP value or goodwill value of that. So as an exercise, we are going to migrate the Bedazzle server content, figure out the best way to do this into the LawFi DAO as like a relevant contribution to all of that policy thought that has come before, and trying to figure out if there are better ways to represent that in now what the LawFi DAO format is, which is what other DAOs are going to have to go through, being that most have their community heart and all of that thought in their Discord servers. So how do you merge it, and how does it become part of a new community? And this goes the reverse way when a DAO has been in existence for enough time that it's identified sub-DAOs, as well as like pockets of things that can be carved out. Perhaps they become revenue earning or revenue generating activities of themselves that feed back to the main DAO. But it's just a really cool experiment that will be fun to go through and quite insightful. The global outreach is really kicking in. So people from across Europe and the US, not a lot in Asia or Asia Pac other than Australia at the moment, actually, but they've been tuning in to some of our recordings, and there's been expressions of interest to say, well, how do we contribute? And one of the ideas is for the establishment subcommittee meeting that we're having later today, we're really going to stress test and interrogate some of these Australian legal structures. So unincorporated association versus incorporated versus co-op, and mutual non-for-profits, how that feeds into tax exemptions. And the idea from some people in the Netherlands was, and in Amsterdam, was, well, we can look at that recording and then we can do a similar session from our country's perspective. So as we go through the process from an Australian law perspective, predominantly, because that is the majority of our membership base at this stage, we can then set this framework, and through myself and through all of our connections, can more actively have a pattern of outreaching to get that true global repository of resources and thinking around DAOs and the tensions and conflict of laws. And then finally, there is a lot of tax consultation going on at the moment, both in Australia and in the UK. So from next week, there will be another working group session devoted to tax, and Nupur, who I think has just joined us, is going to lead one of those tax streams. I myself have been drafting a submission to the UK law, the HMRC DeFi staking and lending call for evidence, and I got halfway through writing it, and then in our separate working group where we're talking about the UK Law Commission's proposal for a third class of property, it's just made me feel like I don't know anything, because we've been thinking that tokens could be property all this time. And in last week's session with this UK Law Commission consultation paper, we had such a intellectual gymnastics call, really breaking down what we think we knew and realizing maybe we don't know as much as we thought, that we could all, the Bitcoin protocol, all of these blockchain protocols are just software licenses. And we just have licenses to use, actually, maybe. And so I've tried to get a few IP lawyers on the UK Law Commission policy call this afternoon, because we thought we needed property lawyer expertise, but it's coming to, we need multi-domain expertise to really stress test what rights are we dealing with when we're interacting with a global network that's all maintaining the ledger. So yeah, all of the sessions will be posted on the website, as you would have already seen. And if you can't make the actual live sessions, then the recordings are always posted. So that's the past week, and that's been a lot. Oh, and I actually want to mention, we have, I think, Rick on the call too. Hi, Rick. Had a fantastic discussion with Rick about insurance this week. So we haven't gone about applying for association liability insurance yet, or even public liability insurance. But the exercise over the next few weeks is documenting what are the key risks that may result in claims against the DAO and its significantly active people or people involved, and trying to go about getting some level of insurance cover, which Rick is an expert on the call. So for the coming week, it's again just continuing to work on the white paper structure. It's nearly ready, I promise. And to present that out, and following our establishment subcommittee call where we're stress testing legal structures, will be a decision and a level of effort devoted to whether we go ahead and apply to be a registered incorporated association in Victoria, to really test that pecuniary benefits definition or not, or whether it's some sort of application to restructure and the tax effects of changing from an unincorporated association to a co-op at this very early stage. So tune in for that one. I think that's going to be a riveting one. So that's really it for the update. I'm going to open up for community discussion now, and just note that we've got John Phillips, who's got an open source software question and ability and effectiveness of DAOs to govern open source software. I might throw to you, John, and you can give a bit of background to that question, and we can offer some thoughts, as well as the Can't Be Evil suite of NFT licenses were launched yesterday. So we'll get into unpacking a bit of that development. And then John, so I think I'll throw to you while I'm looking at the chat comments and seeing if we can bring any of that through. But over to you.
Thanks, Joni. Yeah, so basically last week or two, probably, I've come across a couple of articles that have been looking at the obvious massive use of open source software that kind of drives the way the internet works. Linux operating system in particular drives most of the internet in terms of the kind of switching systems and DNS and everything else that underpins stuff. But it's increasingly being used in I know, safety critical and even sometimes sort of military applications. And there's a Department of Defense initiative to look at how they might or might not trust open source and what it's come from in terms of communities. And that's a very interesting project. I'll share a link on the chat when I finish sort of doing the monologue. But the interesting thing is that then their approach to sensing whether something is trustworthy is to do a kind of AI-driven social investigation of the people that are contributing and what they're doing and what they're like, which is kind of, for me, a bit creepy, even if it works. And then secondly, I came across open source intelligence, which is this movement around the access to sort of satellite data and other forms of data that people are using to track movements of troops in various countries, or the private flights of jets that are owned by celebrities or other stuff. And it struck me that our trust in things that are open source is something that's going to become increasingly important. Now, most of the open source community uses platforms like GitHub and other things, which have a fairly regimented way of pull requests and other things to sort of source. But it struck me that maybe we need a better way of being able to trust the open source that underpins what we use. And what might that way be? Is there a way to give the source libraries and others some form of sort of warranty, protection, sort of things that you might get from commercial software? And do DAOs offer a way forward on that? And that was about as far as I got with my thinking journey. And now I'll stop talking for a bit, and I'll share some of the links that I came across in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, discussion. So please raise your hand if this is something that you feel you can contribute to, or even write some comments in the chat, and I can convey them for you. But yeah, I saw the LinkedIn post you shared, John, and also I think I really appreciated the codeslaw sandwich reference.
I kind of trademark that. So that's we all know code is law. And as I was writing this, there was a person and forgive me, I can't remember the person who gave me this, but BLT, business, legal, and technical. Was it you, Joni? Somebody came up with, okay, so you can like. So somebody in the past has shared some wisdom with me about thinking about problems in terms of business, legal, and technical kind of layers. And that might be something we can use here in our discussions. But that sandwich thinking led me to Cole's law, or Code's law, compressed with the Code's law, which I kind of think is kind of funny. So maybe I should trademark it on the Code's law.
No, it is funny. And I mean, a lot of DAOs is meme culture. So what we're lacking is somebody to turn that into a nice picture with your face on it, probably, John.
Okay, and I know this is a bit of a digression, but I've enjoyed it. This week I've been playing with the you keep using that word, I don't think it means what you think it means, meme. Yeah, and there's that comes out of Princess Bride, and it's used for many things. So I've now got a series of these with things like trustless. You keep using that word, I don't think it means what you think it means. Digital identity, which is obviously my playground. Self-sovereignty, these other things. So I've got a bunch of memes coming out on these words don't mean what you think they mean.
Well, so if somebody wants to put their hands up for head of our meme culture, please do so. Definitely in need of that. But I think that the article that your LinkedIn post referenced, it talked about algorithmic governance, and as much as I don't understand much about AI and machine learning, I probably defer to Rick on this call, actually. But all I know is that it needs data to be trained properly. Now, this is one of the experiments that we could do with our membership token and all of the votes that we put up for our DAO. But it might mean that we put more things up for vote to train the model and to get the data than we otherwise would. So this goes to, we're setting, with the white paper, really, we set our mandate for how the Treasury can be spent by the core contributors. And where we depart from that, that's typically where you would go to your DAO members to vote and make sure that they approve the change in direction or the addition to your direction, which means use of resources, including time and the Treasury assets. So I think that we could experiment what that looks like in terms of governance of what we make open source and what our public goods are. But it's an experiment in itself, because just trying to get enough representatives that represent the people in our community across women, men, LGBTI plus communities, First Nations, persons with a disability, to make sure that where we are going ahead, that it reflects the thinking and the lived experiences and perspectives of people. That they might not be interested in having a say in each of those votes, and therefore is our data not wide enough to train a model to be wholesome and respectful enough, if we want to say that is what we think is the best model to look at open source libraries which are used across all of those sectors of the population. So we haven't solved it yet in our DAO, and I think that Kelsey, if you're in a position to talk, would be a fantastic contributor to this thinking, because there's different models of voting, like just the single token vote, where the more tokens you hold, the more voting weight you have. But then there's quadratic voting to get to a more democratic perspective, but that's showing not to be working. It's still prone to Sybil attacks. And then we've got the new soulbound token specification of that might be the way of getting back to what we really saw in the co-op model of one person, one vote. And then there's a ton of other different voting mechanisms as well. And I'm not sure that any of the literature really pulls it back to what is the appropriate voting mechanism for open source libraries yet. But Kelsey, are you in a position to talk at all?
Yeah, just one thing I would add to that list is something that's probably not talked about enough is ideas around subsidiarity and polycentricity. So how can you localize decisions to the most local level where information is richest? So for example, if you're going to make decisions around the organizational structure, for example, you want the subcommittee on that today to have expertise in that area and make a recommendation to the broader DAO, but you want to actually delegate some level of decision-making authority and operational autonomy to that group to just do the thing. And then you want oversight of the entire DAO to be able to, vet and contribute to whole of DAO matters. And maybe the organizational structure counts as one of those. But I think that's, there's a little bit of literature on that, some of which I've contributed to, but still a very nascent area of kind of thinking and practice of how DAOs operationalize and how we think about that kind of, just the operational autonomy in the day-to-day functions of the DAO, rather than one token, one vote, and then everyone has to vote on it, on everything. So yeah, maybe that's one to add to the list or the experimentation pile.
Yeah, fascinating. And Rick, I don't know if you're in a position to talk, just say yay or nay if you can, but did you have any insights on that perspective?
Yeah, just on I think that the manner by which we make decisions of voting, I think there are a number of, I would suggest in the sort of some of the groups I've been involved with a while ago, and also in Aboriginal communities, there's a sort of an intuition towards consensus, where we use our intuition more. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been, say, to a gathering of Aboriginal people discussing a lot of stuff. I mean, when you come out of the Western world and you go to that, it's, you got 300 black people who are all trying to work out some stuff. It's really frustrating because there's a little group over here, there's a little group over here, no one's driving towards anything, and it's all, you get this sort of desire to project manage this stuff. And at the end of the 2 or 3 days, everything comes together. There's a beauty in intuition. I mean, we used to have corroborates, like hundreds of years ago, we had corroborates where people would come from thousands of k's away, and there you know, we organized this and everyone got there at the right time without needing, you know, telephones and stuff. So there's an understanding. I think we can have trust in non-hierarchical systems a bit more, and I really encourage that. But you know, it needs some structure out of it, but there's a balance there. The other thing, just when you were talking about data, and there is a challenge of testing AI systems where there's the usual perspective is, oh, I need tons of data and everybody represented. My background is in modeling, do a lot of trying to make systems fall over, and that's what I try and do with AI systems. Can I test this, try and crash the system so it becomes so it shows its its tendency to bias or some bad stuff? And the best way, rather than scratching it out for real data can be a bit of an issue. You actually can make up your data, virtual data. It's a lot more efficient process, and it's completely technically robust approach to things.
So we could throw out some scenarios and the data that we would expect in those scenarios and test it that way, rather than sort of slow the DAO down by voting on everything. Yeah,
I mean, all data. Well, it's a bit more complex than this, but most data can be thought of as just one great big long spreadsheet where each row is a person and each column is an attribute. And so you just make up tons and tons of data, and there's procedures for making that up. What I use is I make up 1 million people type of thing and run them through a system to see if the thing, you know, doesn't like, you know, I don't know, somebody, some group of people. You know.
Or what are the anomalies and the exceptions that are thrown out for further investigation?
But what's really important, the first, as we were talking about yesterday, I think, Jody, I think it's really important for people who are au fait with AI understand the limitations of AI, and that's a really, really key. There's too much data fundamentalism out there, as if AI is in some way or ubiquitous and all powerful, and it's not. I mean, AI is just a dumb machine. It's no smarter than toasters, and we don't blame our toaster if it burns our toast, you know. And I think understanding the limitations of AI is really important, but that means you have to define what you want and don't want out of your AI. So if you don't want, and that's actually quite a difficult exercise. So people say, what do you want? We want the algorithm to be fair, but you know, there's 23, the standard literature has 23 definitions of fair. So there's quite a lot of work to do in defining what you want and don't want out of your AI systems.
So the further context of John's post is sort of open source software for libraries that are useful for digital wallets, and particularly with self-hosted wallets, and I'll use MetaMask as the common Ethereum compatible one. What are the things that we do and don't want for a fair digital wallet, so to speak? And there's some sort of community consensus coming to here that there's an expectation that we want that wallet software to tell us if there's been a token that's airdropped to my wallet, I want it to tell me if that's a scam or not. So it's kind of that inbuilt cybersecurity scanning, and so I would defer to John as to how difficult that might be to manage with open source libraries and having regular contributors to inform the intelligence of what is a scam or not. John, do you want to try and tackle that, and then we can go back to Rick? And please, anybody else, put your hand up if you'd like to contribute.
I think that question's got hairs on it, actually, Johnny. But let's do the bits that haven't got so many hairs on them. Okay, one thing I'll share that I think everybody on the call will be welcome to join in on when it's formally announced is that I think it's next week or the week after. There's a conference in Dublin, open source conference in Dublin, hosted by the Linux Foundation and others. And I know that one of the topics that one of the initiatives they're going to raise is an open source wallet and a movement towards open source wallets. Now that isn't focused solely on sort of cryptocurrency kind of wallets and those things, but it's focus on sort of the wallet concept more broadly, it'll inevitably come across the challenge you're describing, Johnny. What kind of functionality and constraints do we want wallets to exhibit? What behaviors should they allow and not allow? And so on. So that's going to be a very interesting kind of body of work in terms of how they describe that. It gets very complicated when we want things to automatically do things on our behalf, because as Rick was saying, it's enormously difficult to make sure it doesn't do the wrong thing on our behalf as much as it does the right thing. So it's sort of the more sophisticated and the more simple we want our complex lives to be, the more likely these things are done without us knowing. And we may realize that after the fact. So I kind of think it's going to be a really interesting body of work when they're trying to do the open source wallet piece. It will have lots of problems they'll have to navigate carefully around. And it's a counter, I guess it's a sort of initiative that's countering somewhat the 8,000-pound gorillas of Apple and Google or Samsung and others, defining what the future of wallets is as best as they can. So yes, I would fear, I think, somewhere where an agent is too sophisticated on my behalf, even though in the past I've written about the idea of having my little AI, AI under my control, where I can say what I wanted to do and it chooses boring things for me, like the energy provider for the house or something, and it just does that kind of negotiation for me on my behalf. That kind of thing I can imagine being useful, but also potentially dangerous.
Yeah, it could get you the most, like a more expensive policy if you've set the bounds that you want renewable energy, and that can still be expensive and peak at quite volatile levels. I understand it's got hairs all over it. So, Rick, did you have any response to that?
I just want to agree with John. It's hairy, but I think that it's the resolution to that is to accept the limitations of AI. So all AI should be an input into a human decision. It shouldn't be a decision made in itself. It's much more complex than that. It's not binary. But that's why all the AI I develop is HITL, is human in the loop, or SITL, society in the loop. And I think that's apt. And your energy example is really, really key. What you need from your AI, I think, John, is something that says, here's your options, mate, type of thing, rather than making the decision itself.
And smart contract development as it is, we can't put too many variables in one smart contract before it conks out or becomes too expensive. So you either have to do more smart contracts in your architecture, or have that reference back to a human input to say, well, no, this is the extra variable or piece of information. And so that can trigger you off to the next set of smart contracts, for example. So the technology at its stage of maturity is still there, where it needs a human in the loop, or it's DAO society in the loop. So I think we'll get into that in quite a lot of detail in both the establishment subcommittee and pay to rely as we work through our public good protocols and the functionality that we want to bring to the world, or what we can use already. I just want to thank Luke for volunteering to be on the meme development subcommittee. If you missed that one come through, thank you. Luke, did you want to make any comments on your anointment? If you're in a position to speak.
I'm in transit, but I am honoured.
Yeah, great. All right, well, so the next thing is, before I get on to the can't be evil licenses, is wanting to hear more about quadratic voting. I can give very basic explanation, unless, again, I'm looking at you, Kelsey, if you'd like to jump in. If you're
do you want to give the basic explanation? I'll talk about the research I've done.
All right, so quadratic voting, very, very basically, is that if I've got 10,000 votes, and if Electra has 20,000 votes, that in theory a vote would pass based on what Electra votes, because she's got more than me. But if there is a vote where it reduces our voting power, so that we have a more democratic, where we're forced to be more democratic. It's not just a yes/no vote as to whether Electra and I vote yes on this strategy or no on the strategy. It becomes, would you like to vote for direction A, B, or C? And so if I am forced to prioritize my votes, so 80% of me wants to go with direction A, and only 10% of me wants to go with direction B, and whatever the remainder is, another 10% to direction C, I get the full weight of my 10,000 votes to each of those priorities. But if I put all of my 10,000 votes just to A, the power of my vote, or the weight of my vote, gets reduced, because I haven't put my mind to prioritizing the resources that are available. And so in terms of my voting weight relative to Electra's, that's how quadratic voting seeks to balance us and get more democratic thinking, rather than that directional voting for a particular outcome, which is more susceptible to lobbying and more corrupt influences. So, but I'll stop there, because Kelsey is definitely the expert on this one.
That was great. So one of the main use cases where the theory of quadratic voting, which was invented by Buterin and kind of written up with Benoit, is Gitcoin public goods funding. So they've used it for allocating funding. So rather than as kind of specific votes, it's called quadratic funding. And what it does is, if you give $1, there's $1. There can be more than $1 from a matched contribution pool of funding. And then if you give $100 or some other pre-specified threshold, there will be, maybe $100 matched or something. So as Joni's pointed out, it means that it's a less kind of plutocratic system. So it doesn't, just people with the most money can't necessarily buy the most votes. The issue with that, although it's mainly been seen to be a success, kind of quote unquote, in the like meme crypto communities, like a new idea sense. So they've allocated over like millions and millions of dollars funding doing this. One of the main limitations is how you prove identity. So obviously, if I give $1 from 10 different wallets, that looks like 10 different people have shown support of a particular project. And then that has resulted, that's a civil attack. So that has resulted in whole kind of machine learning pipelines and then governance and maintenance of those processes to help detect civil behavior. And that's obviously very difficult. I can go into the weeds of that. I've done kind of ethnographic studies on it, and I know the people that designed that pipeline for Gitcoin specifically. Some ways that quadratic voting is being used that are interesting are in other senses. So Gitcoin has just started to use it to rank things. So rather than allocate funding as quadratic funding, they're using quadratic voting just to allocate how grants appear on the grants page. So, obviously if your grant appears at the top and people are going to sort through thousands of grants every quarter to vote for, or to fund some, if you appear closer to the top, it's better for you. So it's like a pre-filtering system. It's not the highest stakes. So perhaps civil attacks don't matter as much. But it's still the opportunity for the community to pre-signal what might be important to rank higher. Other communities such as OneHive, which is a pretty interesting DAO, are using it for retroactive funding. And so that's a way to look at what has produced value and value being defined by the community itself in the past. So they allocate their funding in a different way from the Treasury to build open source software. But then now they have projects submit proposals to say, hey, over the last, however long, we've contributed these things to this community. And the community itself is voting to allocate them, you know, a bonus, pretty much like some additional treasury. And that community voted in favour of continuing and expanding the quadratic voting in that sense to do retroactive funding. So that's some various kind of observations from the field and some different ways that people are using quadratic voting and quadratic funding. And I'll pause there, I guess, Joni, for you to hook it back into maybe how it's relevant for this community.
It's super relevant because we're going to get to the stage where there's so many things that we have to do and have to triage. That lends itself to centralisation, where, for example, I have to figure out what task is most important to deal with first, and I don't have a framework to go back to the community to help me. You know, and this is just an example. It might be me, it might be Electra, it might be you, Kelsey. What is our delegation of authority to centrally triage or prioritise tasks, or how do we enable that task to be automated and subject to governance if that's the appropriate thing in our model? And I can see it playing out because we already have some expressions of interest to do the legal statement products, as well as the tax statement products, and then some general commercial products. And each of those is its own area of focus, which unless we have clear subcommittee heads for each line, you know, without more resources, it's just a one-by-one effort of tackling. And Kelsey, what you've triggered for me is there was a fantastic book by Sophia Noble that actually went into the Google algorithm of ranking on the search engine page, and how the way that search engines have been built is based on the library system, which is a citation of author and year, basically, and that in itself is this institutionalized discrimination, actually, because we don't have the richness in the citation to properly inform a ranking. And so that then has led to algorithms being manipulated so that with advertising and with money, you can have higher on the ranking. And if instead the citations didn't just include J. Pirovich, K. Nabin, but also included our attributes, so woman, mother, experienced academic of 10 plus years, and actually the richness that makes up our perspectives, then if there is some sort of community voting, then that can inform whether our work is at the top of the chain or not. And also just the way of demonstrating it in a line or a list is unfair. Instead, it's proposed by Sophia Noble that your search engine results should be in a pie chart form, and based on the relevance of your search or whatever DAO proposal that you want to vote on, the pie chart shows you whether it advances society, whether it advances mathematical thinking, or there's a couple of categories that Sophia proposes. And so that work was incredible, and we haven't seen any search engines sort of adopt or move away from that list form of results. And even in what we see with Snapshot, which is a platform that a lot of DAOs use for voting, you still have to work through your proposals in that list form and read it and digest it, which is not, it doesn't lend itself to be interesting or to really, it's not a good user experience. And so I think from that visual and pulling you in kind of experience and figuring out where you're most relevant or where you'd like to most have your say, we should experiment more differently with both our algorithms, our protocols, and how we depict them. And that actually is the thinking that's going into the white paper structure at the moment. So it's not just writing as you would expect with the other DAO white papers. It's the writing, the proposition. The second column is whether there's been a DAO vote in respect of that mandate. And then the third column is the representation of voting for that particular thing, and whether that's meant that we're more sufficiently globally decentralized, or actually in contrast more centralized towards Australia, because for that particular vote more Australians voted. And so finally we have this dynamic document, at least, and maybe it's not visually appealing yet, but it gives us that dynamic and living sense of what our culture and our society is at any one time, with every vote that brings us forward or backwards in our thinking. So I'm not sure that it's definitely not resolved. It's all up for experimentation, and I'm very open to different ways of thinking and trying to support that. Kelsey, was there anything else that you wanted to say on that conviction voting and the gardens governance?
Yeah, I just dropped in the chat. Yeah, some of the kind of forefront of thinking and actually other stuff that OneHive is doing. One of the key people in OneHive developed the gardens framework, tries to look at kind of the components of a holistic system of governance, from community constitution to enforcement. And their voting component is called conviction voting, which is about the collective signal of preference over time. But they've got really great documentation, so you can read more about that, and maybe we can talk about it next time if it's of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, with just under 10 minutes to go, I'm going to close out with some discussion on those can't be evil NFT licenses, but do feel free to put your hand up. We've have a jam-packed day with establishment subcommittee to follow next, then the pay to rely, the membership token, and then the community building, as well as the UK session today. So jam-packed. Just quickly on these NFT licenses, this was an effort by a number of individuals and law firms to try and deliver some public goods as well as certainty. We've seen a number of NFT projects launch without any mention of what the IP rights are. So there might be artworks or other video files that are linked to that NFT token ID, and nobody really knows if they have full commercial rights to exploit their particular artwork that's referenced to the token ID, or none. And in the case of Moonbirds, was it Moonbirds? It was a significant project where they've just launched 4 months ago, and the license terms have recently just changed, effectively from full commercial rights to limited rights. And for anybody who has allocated a lot of capital, and I think that those Moonbird NFTs were going for upwards of 3 ETH and more, that's a significant amount of money to be paying for 4 months later your rights to substantially change. So thank you, Leah. Yeah, clarifying that it's Moonbirds that went to the Creative Commons license. So in order to help NFT project founders and even DAOs be more specific at the time of launch with, and even just have the tools to consider what kind of community they want to create, there's these 6 different licenses that they can pick and choose from. And the fact of providing options also informs them to say, well, yes, we do want to give full commercial rights to our community, and these are the consequences. There's a GitHub and there's a number of other materials that help talk them through what the consequences of that decision is. Same for limited license rights, perhaps because the centralised team does want to retain artistic discretion and managerial control over the partnerships and various things that need to be built whilst a community is building around the license. There's another specific one. I haven't gone through all 6 of them yet. I just saw it last night, but there's another one that is for use, but that can terminate if the artwork is used for hate speech. and other undesired purposes. So if, and this really helps, because once an NFT is out there in global circulation, if you don't necessarily have the owner or the control over those smart contracts anymore, or controlling the transfers of those NFTs, you can't effectively stop somebody from using or exploiting or on selling that NFT. But if through these chain analysis, new methods of knowing your transaction and knowing your wallet, get a suspicion, or you know that the NFT is being used in that particular way, that's now giving you at least a very basic and simple license, but the control to say, no, you no longer have the permission. And in another breath, we have seen a US subpoena issued by airdropping an NFT into the alleged criminal person's wallet. Now, it was effective for proper service of notice of the legal action or potential legal claims, but I don't think that they ever got any response from that person. So there's still a limit to how effectively our existing legal means are. But I do encourage you to have a look at the suite of licenses. I don't think that it will, like NFTs and for artworks and video files is a start, but I think because it's out there as a public good, we could see these licenses taking on more and different uses and meanings and adaptations. So definitely one to watch, and a considered and a very robust piece of work from the collection of lawyers and firms that were involved in producing that. I laugh as well because it's just another action by a group of lawyers that will prevent a revenue stream for law firms. They won't be doing bespoke IP licenses for NFT projects. The more good quality public resources there are out there, which I think is great inertia to encourage us to do things differently and contribute to open source projects. So Kelsey, how do you judge hate speech? Could someone revoke an NFT license under that guise? Well, yes, I haven't gone through the in detail terms and the supporting materials for that particular license category, but it's got to have some helpful tips on what is considered hate speech, or likely to invoke violence or induce violence, which I think we saw a lot of that discussion pan out with the raid on the White House at the Trump time. So I don't know that there again was any clear definitions. As Rick mentioned earlier, there's 27 different definitions of fair. I'm sure there's a number of different definitions of hate speech too. So again, if you want to have bespoke legal advice, and that's something that you are concerned about with your NFT project, that's where you would get specific legal advice to say, we're concerned about these specific harms. How do we protect ourselves and our community against that before the token launch, and implement your checklists or your appropriate controls to protect your community? What is the project called? They're called Can't Be Evil licenses. So similar to CCO is Creative Commons, the acronym is going to be known as CBEs, the CBE licenses, and there's a whole preamble as to why that name was chosen. But in theory, because we don't want to do any harm when we're creating public goods, and if we don't have these licenses or some legal support aids to help us do no harm, actually this uncertainty and this confusion of not considering the legal rights and obligations, that in a sense is doing some harm to our use and our free use and trust in these public goods. Yes, I know, Vic, just a little Friday morning law firm anarchy. It's great. And thank you, Andrew, for including the link there. Another good product from with the support of A16Z. So we're at time. I thank everybody for making the time this morning. It's always great to see you. It's good to see the community growing, and see you in the Discord soon, and in the JIRA, and in some of the other subcommittee calls later today. Have a great one. Bye.
Thanks, Shirley. Bye.
Cheers.